assistant, our committee assistant, is out with her sister on some health issues. So we've got Susie Murphy here today. And I do see her regular because she's in the office complex with Senator Fagg and myself. Also, I serve on the Utilities Committee, so we're glad to have Susie filling in. We really appreciate the fact that she's willing to step up and assist as needed. The first item on our agenda this morning is House Bill 2254. House Bill 2254, we will open the hearing on House Bill 2254, requiring milk processors to hold payments in trust for milk producers until full payment is received with funds in escrow considered held in trust. And we will start with an overview from our reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. House Bill 2254, as the chair mentioned, would enact new laws relating to payments for milk sold by a milk producer to a milk processor. Section 1 would provide definitions of relevant terms used throughout the bill, and you can see those on page 1. Section 2 on page 2 of the bill would require milk processors to hold payments in trust for milk producers until full payment of the purchase price of milk is received. Funds in escrow would be considered held in trust. The milk producer could require a milk processor to establish an escrow account for the producer's benefit if the processor fails to make timely payment to the milk producer. Funds held in trust or escrow would be the property of the milk producer. A processor would not be required to hold payments in trust or escrow if the milk producer does not give written notice to the processor by the end of the 30th business day after a final date of payment for the full payment has not been received, or a payment instrument received by the milk producer is dishonored and the milk producer does not give written notice to the milk processor by the end of the 15th business day after notice of the dishonor was received. Section 3 would provide that producers could only purchase raw milk if payment is made according to federal milk marketing orders and agreed terms and full payment is made. Section 4 would state that the act would not apply to transactions between cooperative associations acting as marketing agents and their members. And Section 5 would provide that processors failing to pay milk producers in accordance with the act would be liable for the purchase price of the milk, interest, and reasonable attorney fees. The bill would take effect on July 1 and pass the House on a vote of 123-0. And I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Reviser. We appreciate that. Sounds like a controversial bill. Committee, do you have questions of our Reviser? Seeing none? Oh, okay, sorry. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any role, does the state agency have to oversee any of the trust monies or intervene in at any point to make sure there's a proper accounting or anything like that, or is this all between the producers and the processor?
I don't believe a state agency is involved.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you, Reviser Lawrence. Our first and only conferee to appear before us is Aaron Popelka, Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs, Kansas Livestock Association.
Thank you, Chairman Peck and members of the committee. I'm Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association. Excuse me. A little background on this bill. About a little over a year ago, a company called Kansas Dairy Ingredients near Hugoton, Kansas, defaulted on milk payments to dairy farmers. And that cost dairy producers in the neighborhood of $5 million. After that default, which impacted some of our dairy producers, at our convention, they came and asked us to enacted a policy asking us to support a milk trust bill. A little bit about this, when you hear the word trust, it may be a little misleading. It's not one of those things you use in estate planning. This is a statutory trust, and essentially what we're trying to do, if you're familiar with the beef industry, beef producers have had for over 100 years a packer trust as well as a market trust, dealer trust, that the federal government's put in place under the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921. Essentially what that says, and what this does for milk producers, is say that if you are a cash seller, and that's key, you can't have extended credit. If you're a cash seller of milk to a processor, the statute is saying that they are to hold that milk and the proceeds from that milk. So proceeds would be things like money received from sale of cheese or yogurt made from the milk, or if the products still exist, the products themselves. And that is to be held for the producer. And really, the way we drafted this was to keep capital requirements low. We worked with the processors. I should also say we worked with the banking industry as well to make sure everyone was comfortable with the bill. And you'll notice that in there is escrow requirements, but those don't kick in until there's a default. And that gets to we don't want to require capital requirements ahead of a default. But if there's a default, essentially what it says is, let's say there's a bankruptcy, it says that to the bankruptcy trustee, these funds belong to the producer. They don't belong to a creditor because there was a cash sale. And so the goal here is to hopefully get cash producers' money back in the event of default. Now, there are some requirements for the producer to qualify for the trust. They have to give notice within 30 days of a payment not being made. And so with the milk industry, when you think of cash sales, you're probably thinking of a store and I hand the clerk cash or make a debit card payment for whatever I'm purchasing. In the dairy industry, the cash sales take a little longer because we're delivering milk, but it's got to be graded first before they can determine how much to pay for it. So payments may take more than a few days to determine, but it's still a cash sale. So there's typically a date in these contracts when the payment needs to be due. And then if it doesn't show up, the producer has 30 days to give notice in writing to the processor, hey, you missed the payment. I want you to make sure you hold this in trust. They can also, the escrow piece that you see in there, though, and this is key because one of the things we did when we worked on this bill, we wanted to make it as similar as possible to other states. Texas is a nearby state that also has a milk trust in place. This is largely based on Texas's statute with one exception, and that is a requirement that escrow does not kick in until 3 days after a payment's been missed. That gets to that. We're not going to require you to set aside a separate account, set aside capital until we know there's an issue. And that was working. That was one of the requests of the milk processors, and we're happy to accommodate that. So they can, once they make a request, the trust kicks in, and then should there be a bankruptcy or some other form of default, the producer, and Senator Titus's question, it is really a self-help statute. We did not want the government to have to be involved to spend any government money. Simply a self-help, should there be a default, the producer can go to court and say, hey, there's a statutory trust, this is the milk I sold, and these are the funds that are proceeds that it attaches to. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions that the committee may have on the bill.
Committee, questions of Mr. Popelka. Senator Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I need to make sure Mr. Popelka gets at least one question. I thought about asking him if soy milk would be included in this, but so for our Kansas dairy, how many are, do you have an estimate of the percentage of milk or percentage of transactions that are going to be done as a cash sale versus all others?
Not off the top of my head. I would guess a majority of the sales are probably going to end up being cash sales. I doubt a lot of credit extended by producers to the processors.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you for bringing the legislation. It's a highly volatile market. I think our dairymen deal with enough uncertainty, so thank you for bringing this bill forward.
Additional questions, committee? Has there been a rash of defaults recently or in the past?
Mr. Chairman, the only one that I'm aware of, at least in the near recent past, was the Kansas Dairy Ingredients, but it was a fairly large loss, as I mentioned earlier.
All right. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Vice President, for your presentation here. Do you know how many milk processors there are in Kansas?
Off the top of my head, I know of two fairly large ones. I know there's a number of small ones. I don't know the total, but the larger ones would be DFA has their plant, I believe, in Garden City, and then the other one is I'm blanking. They're out of Texas, and they're one of those that we worked with on this to make it similar to Texas. I'm blanking on the name. Sorry, Senator.
No problem. Follow up to that, I'm sitting here thinking, set these kind of things in place, every industry has this problem. You know, you think somebody's going to go bankrupt in the process. There might be something different with this since there's only a couple of processors, you know, that would come into this. But when somebody files bankruptcy, that just kind of freezes it where it's at. And I understand what they're doing and why, but I could envision there'd be a lot of businesses that would like to do this kind of thing. So just comment. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I would say that in this particular instance, and I think it's why you see this in the beef industry as well, you're dealing with a perishable product. And so there's some urgency in delivery and some urgency in trying to get it processed to a more shelf-stable state. And so I would say that's probably the need in agriculture for these particular products.
Appreciate your testimony on this legislation, Mr. Popelka. Committee, I will direct your attention to written testimony that we have from Janet Bailey, CEO of Kansas Dairy, and Brian Heman as well. And we have no other proponents or opponents or neutral that have provided testimony, so we will close the hearing on House Bill 2254. Committee, if we have time at the end, unless there is objection, I don't do this generally, but because we're up against the clock time-wise, we may work 2254. It doesn't seem to be controversial, but we shall see how the time plays out and what the committee's desires are. We will now open up the hearing on House Bill 2085, extending the expiration of permits permitted under the Water Pollution Control Permit System from 5 years to 10 years. And we will begin with an overview of the legislation from our reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After your explanation, I'm not sure there's much more that needs to be said, but I will go ahead anyway. Current law does authorize the Secretary of Health and Environment to issue water pollution control permits to wastewater treatment facilities for a term of up to 5 years. House Bill 2085 would authorize the Secretary to issue those permits for a term of up to 10 years. You can see that change in 3 places on page 1 of the bill. It's in lines 25, 28, and 30. The bill would take effect on July 1 and did pass the House on a vote of 123-0, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
On page 2, there are also some changes, capacity of 1,000 through 49.99 as it relates to fees. Was that considered cleanup language?
Yes, sir. Thank you for pointing that out. There is cleanup language on page 2 of the bill. Yes.
Okay, that's what I would presume. Questions of our reviser committee? All right, seeing none, thank you. We trust that we will receive an answer to the question that I did not ask, and that is why are we going double rather than some other number? But our first proponent and only proponent is Shelley Shores, Section Chief, Bureau of Water, Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Peck and members of the committee. I'm Shelley Shores with the Section Chief of Wastewater and Stormwater for the Bureau of Water.
Your microphone down.
KDHE.
There we go. Thank you.
Is that better?
There,
okay.
That's better.
KDHE is a proponent of House Bill 2085, which requests a simple revision to the existing statute that would allow state water pollution control permits an extension from 5 years to a 10-year term, up to a 10-year term. KDHE issues both federal and state permits. Federal permits are direct point source discharging permits covered under federal regulations. This bill only applies to the state permits, which are small non-discharging facilities. There is no environmental impact. The benefit of this change would allow permit writers to focus on new and existing federal discharging permits that are complex, and that would also eventually help reduce backlog on permit issuance. In addition, many of these state permits, the state non-discharging permits, cover small rural towns. And this would alleviate some of the paper workload on the city clerks. There would, again, be no environmental impact. The permitted facilities would continue to have routine inspections as they currently do, receive technical assistance and operator training. So that's my presentation for that, and thank you, Chairman Peck, and I will stand for any committee questions.
Okay. We are extending the permit period from 5 years to 10 years, but are not changing any fees.
Correct.
So is there currently a fee for the permit?
There is.
And is that what we see? Sorry, I haven't read the legislation in its entirety. Is that what we see on page 2?
I believe that was a correction.
So do you know what the fee, you do not know what the fee is?
I didn't see that correction.
But you said there is a fee,
There is a fee for these permits, correct?
and the fee is
The fee for $185
the permits.
for these permits, depending on whether they're municipal or industrial. Some of the industrials are $60.
All right. What I'm getting at, said there was no fiscal note. You're going.
No, there's no change for us. I'm not sure if that was something for another type of facility.
No, what I'm getting at, you're lengthening the fees, so you're only getting them.
No, they're annual. I'm sorry, they're annual. I misunderstood that question.
Okay,
They are annual fees,
so that will not change.
correct?
Okay, now we're on the same page.
Okay, thank you.
Questions, committee of Ms. Shores? Senator Shane, you're going to let her off? No, that's fine, that's fine.
Ask a question if you want me to.
Okay, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony, appreciate that. We do have written testimony, committee, from another proponent, and we've already heard from that gentleman today, Mr. Pelka, with the Kansas Livestock Association. We have no other written, neutral, nor opponent testimony that has been provided to the chair, so we have nothing to add. This bill, equally non-controversial, it would appear. We shall see how time flies, how it plays out as working the bill, but we will close the hearing on House Bill 2085. Now, the next one will not be nearly as simple and easy, but we've got, fortunately, a decent amount of time, so we shall see if we can get the committee hearing wrapped up on House Bill 2172, establishing the Water Program Task Force, and I'm not going to read the rest of the title, but we will open up the hearing on House Bill 2172 with an overview from our reviser.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2172 would establish the Water Program Task Force to evaluate the state's water program and funding. The task force would have 23 voting members and 10 non-voting members. You can see the list of voting members starting in line 9 on page 1. The voting members would include the chairs and ranking minority members from various legislative committees. It would also include Kansas residents appointed by legislative leadership and representatives from certain Kansas organizations. The list of non-voting members starts on page 2 in line 25 and would include the secretaries and directors of certain state departments, divisions, and offices. Any member of the task force who is not a legislator would be required to represent specific stakeholders, which you can see on page 3 in lines 1 through 18. Not more than 2 members of the task force could represent the same stakeholder. Members of the task force would be required to be Kansas residents and include representation from all 5 conservation regions of the state. Appointments to the task force would be required to be made by April 30th of 2025. The Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate would select co-chairpersons of the task force from the members of the task force. The task force would be required to evaluate major risks to the quality and quantity of the state's water, including the impact on current and future economic growth and population stability. They would also have to look at the steps to define and achieve an ongoing multi-generational promise of water for Kansans and evaluate current funding and determine whether that funding is sufficient to address water issues identified in the state water plan. The task force would be required to prepare and submit a report to the legislature and the governor by January 31st of 2026. The provisions of this bill would expire on July 1, 2027. The bill would take effect upon publication in the Kansas Register and pass the House on a vote of 109 to 12. And I will stand for any questions.
Committee questions of our reviser. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can the members appointed, say, by the Senate Minority Leader that are required to just be a Kansas resident, could they be a legislator?
I think as long as they are a Kansas resident and represent one of the stakeholders on page 3, they could also be a legislator.
Thank you.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you. And today we have the honor committee of having a constituent from Senate District 15 as our first conferee, a man that many of you would know because he spent a period of time in the state capitol, former representative. I don't know if former representative is the right way to call it, but he's no longer representative, but Richard Perrell. Mr. Perrell, welcome to the Senate side of the Capitol. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to your testimony. I did notice that it's joint testimony with former Senator McGinn, or Senator McGinn.
Yes, it is.
She's apparently not with us today.
No, but I think she may be online. She was planning to be online, so I'm not sure if she is or she isn't.
Well, we don't allow WebEx testimony in this committee, but she's certainly welcome to watch and listen in.
Thank you. Chairman Peck, Vice Chairman Alley, Senate Minority Leader Ware, members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before you this morning. It's an honor and a privilege. As the chairman has indicated, in 2018, Senator McGinn and I served as co-chairs of the Joint Legislative Transportation Division Task Force. It was House substitute for Senate Bill 391. The task force that we're talking about here is very similar to the setup of what we had in transportation. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the reviser for giving a very good overview of this bill. Thank you very much. Based on the transportation task force, we examined a number of things. And in your testimony, you'll find that there are 10 bullet points. I'm not going to read them to you. I know you can all read and read well, probably better than I can. I would touch base just a minute on 3 or 4 of them. First one would be the best structure for the state to deliver water programs. Second would be a source of funding. Everything comes down to funding, it seems like. Then some non-fiscal measurements for the state for clean water. Clean water is extremely important to us. We all have to have drinking water. Next one would be a system drawing down federal funds, and that's what we did in the Transportation Task Force. We worked a lot on all of those things, and then there's a number of them that I did not go ahead and read out to you. Ultimately, the task force that you're looking at would spend focus a lot of time and energy on getting input from around the state, from all types of individuals that have an interest in water. Task force structure not only ensures key legislators are at the table, but also key stakeholders. It is key that members of the public, businesses, locals, ag, have very much need to be involved. They were in the transportation. They are, as you heard earlier, they are also involved in the task force also. So this is always all true for that too. As many of you are familiar with the state of Kansas, the highway transportation system, it's really the envy of all our states around us. And that's what I would envision for this task force that you're looking at on water. Ladies and gentlemen, water is so important to our businesses, to agriculture, to industry, and probably number one is clean drinking water. We have to have potable drinking water. And it's a statewide issue, and it involves each and every one of us, and it's important for each and every one of us. This time, I'd like to recognize your staff, the Legislative Research Department, and revisers of statutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we couldn't function in this building without these folks, and they are so important, and they're not only important in our meetings like this one, but they are also extremely important in the task force because they are heavily involved and work each and every day, a lot more hours than all the rest of us did on that. I'd like to thank you for looking at House Bill 2172, and I look forward to your success in preparing a great water plan for the great state of Kansas and all of our citizens. Mr. Chairman, I've provided an additional handout that your staff has, and they may have already passed that out. I'm not sure. If they haven't, I would ask if they would do it this time. Senator McGinn, if you are on the line, if you have any additional comments that you would like to make with the chairman's permission.
I appreciate you, Representative Perrell, but again, this committee does not allow WebEx testimony. We've had too many problems with connection and frustration, so just to make it consistent, we do not allow.
Okay.
You willing to stand for questions at this time?
Absolutely.
Okay. I do have a couple. Do you remember what was the number of individuals on the task force for T-Works or for the transportation?
The number that was on the task force, I believe it was identical to what was on this bill, but I'm not positive, but I'm sure that Ms. Julie Lorenz, who is in the audience, could answer that question too.
So this bill has 23 voting, 10 non-voting. Did the
Yes.
task force for transportation have non-voting members also? Or do you recall? I know I'm asking you to go back several years.
You're asking me to go back a number of years, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. No, I don't recall, but did we have?
We can get that from
We did
our
have.
research or,
We did have non-voting members.
okay. Committee, do you have questions of Representative Perrell? And I noticed that the number of locations is significant. Again, asking you to go back and remember, and maybe a little bit of speculation. Do you feel like you had too many meetings, the right number, not enough?
I think we had about the right number, as I recall, because they were strategically placed so that people didn't have to drive too far to get to them, because we all know people are busy and they aren't going to travel large distances, long distances. So I think if I remember correctly, and you can't hold me to this exactly, but I believe there were 10 meetings, 10 locations.
Right there, you were correct. That part you remember. There were 10 meetings, and that, I don't know, it would be up to the chair of the task force, but, okay, well, I appreciate you being here, traveling up from Parsons today or last evening, and providing testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we have our reviser would like to correct something that was said earlier by her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence. Senator Francisco, I'd like to amend my answer to your question. At the bottom of page 2, in subsection B, it does state that each member of the task force who is not a member of the legislature has to be from one of those stakeholder organizations. So I would just like to clarify, a legislator would not have to be a member of one of those organizations, but there is also no exclusion on an appointment being of a legislator.
Appreciate that clarification. Our next conferee, Jay Armstrong, Chairman of the Flinchbow Center for Food and Ag Policy. You're going to have to correct me on that one word, Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jay Armstrong, and I am chairman of the Flinchbow Center for Food and Agricultural Policy. The Flinchbaugh Center is a newly established policy analysis board named after the legendary Barry Flinchbaugh, of whom I hope many of you know and remember. We lost him here about 3 years ago, but is known as the father of the Freedom to Farm Bill, and many other things that he accomplished while as ag policy specialist at Kansas State. Our center embodies Barry's process of identifying problems objectively, presenting the alternatives, analyzing their consequences, all done objectively. And this allows stakeholders such as yourselves to determine positions based on unbiased policy analysis. And our mission is to provide independent, research-driven analysis of the most pressing challenges in agriculture and food policy, and certainly there is no issue more critical to the future of our state than water. The sustainability of our state's water resources will determine the long-term viability of our farming communities, the strength of our agricultural economy, the resilience of our rural infrastructures. This bill establishes a water program task force to evaluate water programs and their funding mechanisms. And I want to emphasize the importance of ensuring that this task force has access to sound research policy insights to inform its recommendations. And at the Flinchbaugh Center, we engage in those complex, multifaceted policy issues. And we would stand ready to support the task force in the following ways. The first being to provide that independent, research-driven analysis. Our expertise in evaluating water policy challenges and potential solutions can help ensure that the task force recommendations are grounded in objective data and economic realities. And probably the most important one is number two, bringing together diverse stakeholders. As an established conveyor of key agricultural and food policy peoples, and Barry would call those people kingmakers. And putting those kingmakers together and asking them to give of their time is what ensures results. And number three, evaluating the sustainable and effective funding mechanisms. Granted, that is a big lift, but addressing our challenges require long-term financial sustainability, and we can assist in assessing those strategies and balance economic feasibility with environmental stewardship. As chairman of the Flinchbaugh Center, and by the way, I was Barry Flinchbaugh's first teaching, and I got the opportunity of a lifetime back in 1972 to research, analyze, and educate the consequences of changing our state's constitution over to use value appraisal for agricultural land. And then we took it on the road. And then we educated those member organizations of how it would work. And then it was you stakeholders back then that said, let the people vote on changing the Constitution. And as Paul Harvey would say, now you know the rest of the story. And I will tell you all, as to this day, I still get calls from Nebraska state senators asking me how we did it. And if any of you are aware of the property tax problems in Nebraska, you'll know why they're calling. Their problem is they don't have a Barry Flinchbaugh. For Kansas to secure a multi-generation promise of water security, it's essential that this task force leverage and exercise and has the expertise to approach the institutions that the Flinchbaugh Center can do. And so that's what we have to offer. We urge the committee to recognize the value of independent policy research and stakeholder engagement in this ongoing growing issue of Kansas water use. Thank you, and I'd be willing to take questions.
Do you have questions of Mr. Armstrong? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here and giving us some background. So I really appreciate the offer of participation. How do you see that happening? Is it as a member of the task force or?
We would probably be open to either way, but I think to get results, should this task force be approved, we would hope that they would take a look at us as someone that can provide you, stakeholders, as well as member organizations, with that objective analysis where we will state the alternatives. And one alternative will always be, as Barry used to say, leave things as they are. And then you start going down the list, and then you state the consequences to those alternatives, and everybody has that information. And interest groups can decide what they want to choose by their membership policies, and that's how they will come to lobby you. And so I see that as a more preferable way, as opposed to being a member on a task force. We have to be very careful. And it's probably the thing as chairman that's more important to me than anything is we never take a position on issues. We have to stay objective or we will not grow our reputation as being that provider.
Was there a similar opportunity that was made available on the transportation visioning? Where did they get their information, or what? But we also have an agency more clearly defined. One of the issues with water is there's so many stakeholders. It's they had the Department of Transportation.
You're kind of out of my lily pad right now on that one. You'll have to probably ask somebody in transportation how they went about that.
Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, for your testimony. I just want to inform the committee that Mr. Armstrong is one of my constituents, and he's also one of our premier ag experts in the state. He's been recognized by K-State numerous times for his work in the ag industry. Question, Mr. Armstrong, do you think the size of this committee is too large? 23 voting members seems awful big to me.
Well, I don't want to take a position on helping you decide what size your task force could be. But I can tell you, should the task force decide to engage the Flinchball Center, we would probably go to some type of kingmaker type of board in the 8 to 12 member. And out of that, there's going to be irrigators, there's going to be municipality people, there's going to be industrial people. We will need to have some lawmakers, because as that process goes along and you begin to learn things, it's important that we have stakeholders such as yourselves that have learned things from the very beginning. And we might even have to have a token bureaucrat, because without them, they know how things will be administered. And it's that kind of a board that we would use that's going to identify the problems and then make sure, and we will go to K-State for our experts, whether it's a water economist or a hydrologist or whatever is needed. When I went in to form this committee with Barry's widow, who put in the initial money, I told President Linton, there's 3 things that I want to be. I want to be self-funding, self-governing, and self-perpetuating, but I want to be affiliated with Kansas State University. And frankly, his 105 project was where we fit in real well. And so that's my promise to him, but should we not be able to find that expertise within the state, we do have the option to look elsewhere. But I think we've got it right here in
Chairman
the state.
Armstrong, we appreciate you being with us this morning, appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our next conferee committee is Wendy Stark, Legislative Liaison, League of Kansas Municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Wendy Stark with the League of Kansas Municipalities. We are a membership organization that provides services for cities and local government. Our members comprise over 550 of the 625 cities, as well as 40 counties. Each year, we get together to put together a statement of municipal policy, and one of our 7 legislative priorities this year is related to water. And this is the policy. Access to water is paramount for the growth and viability of communities. Government at all levels should pursue the conservation, protection, and development of current and future water supplies to ensure access to clean, safe, and affordable water for all Kansans. We support state action in consultation with municipal providers to address surface and groundwater resources. And we do believe that this task force addresses part of, or is a component of addressing our water policy. One of the things that I did want to share is that when there were the local consults last year, our members, local government was the largest stakeholder group attending those across the state. Over 84% of the population of Kansans live in cities, which is just over 2.4 million people. We do believe that the League of Kansas Municipalities or a representative appointed by the League should be included as a member of the task force. So we do support this water task force, and I would be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee questions of Ms. Stark? Seeing none, appreciate your testimony. Our next conferee is Mike Lawless, Water Assurance Districts of Kansas. Mr. Lawless?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Mike Lawless, and I'm president of the Kansas River Water Assurance Districts, and I'm here this morning to represent the Water Assurance Districts of Kansas. With me today, Tim Peoples is president of the Cottonwood Neosho Water Assurance District. Jared Morrison, who is president of the Mayor Dezeen Water Assurance District, was unable to be here this morning, but we also have the general manager, Doug Haney, of the Water Assurance Districts with us this morning. The Water Assurance Districts of Kansas are here to support House Bill 2172, creating the Water Program Task Force. While we are mentioned on page 3, line 12 of the bill for water assurance districts, we are, as a potential stakeholder on the task force, we are also here to request an amendment to the bill that would allow the Water Assurance Districts of Kansas to appoint a voting member. And I understand the committee size, and that may not be possible, but we would sure like to express our interest in being part of that. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to tell you just a brief few things about water assurance districts. We are major stakeholders in federal reservoir storage in Kansas. Our districts were formed by municipal and industrial water right holders to purchase physical storage in federal reservoirs. This storage is used in times of drought to release water from district-owned storage to supplement our members' downstream water demands during times of drought. The strategic implementation of the Kansas Water Plan has outcomes focused on reservoirs and resiliency. This is what water assurance districts were formed to do, to deal with resiliency in times of drought. We have purchased and own 35% of the non-Army Corps of Engineers storage in federal reservoirs in Kansas. Only the state of Kansas owns more water in the federal reservoirs, in the non-Army Corps of Engineers storage in reservoirs in Kansas at 55%. With the storage that we own, the water districts of Kansas provide drought resilience to our members. This is for multiple Evergy power production facilities, multiple industries, and over 1.2 million Kansans, businesses, and industries that are served through our public water supply members. Think about that, 1.2 million Kansans, that's 40% of the population of Kansas that are reliant on the assurance districts for water in times of drought. Our reservoir storage provides backup to 250 million gallons per day in water demand. The districts have invested more than $12.5 million in physical storage assets in the federal reservoirs. And along with that storage ownership, it also obligates us to paying for some of the core operation and maintenance costs in those reservoirs. And that ranges from about $500,000 a year to as much as $800,000 per year. The drought resilience the districts provide is essential to economic and industrial development. The Cottonwood Neosho District is negotiating to buy more storage in support of the industrial development on the former Parsons Army Ammunition Facility or plant. We also, in the Kansas River District, we anticipate the need to buy more storage to support the new demands created by the industrial development at the former Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant. The Water Assurance Districts of Kansas are here to support House Bill 2172 and request the committee's consideration of our amendment. And again, if that's not something that's a desire, we would sure like to be part of the task force to lend our expertise to that committee. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Questions of Mr. Lawless Committee? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. How many non-core lakes do we have in Kansas?
How many non-core lakes? I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. And I just wondered if you guys talk about sedimentation, and that's a big issue coming up and a big cost.
Correct.
If that kind of has been addressed at that area, so.
Well, I think it's something that we're definitely interested in, and we work with the Water Office and Water Resources Department to deal with that. We're certainly a partner in that. We have an interest in making sure that that water is there for our members for 50 years down the road. That's what we do. We want to make sure that water's there in times of drought.
Thank you for your presentation. Seeing no further questions, our next conferee is Joshua Swati on behalf of the Kansas Municipal Utilities. Mr. Swati.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Joshua Swati on behalf of the Kansas Municipal Utilities. We are the statewide association of all the electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater systems that are municipally owned across the state of Kansas. We rise in support, I would say, here toward the end of the committee hearing. The municipal utilities are probably less concerned with the overall structure of the task force. We understand changes likely will need to be made, but I would like to help the committee understand sort of the arc of history of all of this, because many of you are probably saying, what does success even look like on a task force like this? And I would say it's important to keep in mind the value of continuing this conversation. I noticed some FFAers sitting in the back of the committee today, and when I see FFAers, I'm also reminded of 4-Hers, and one of the 4-H mottos is to make the best better. And that's really what we're trying to do with water policy in Kansas. And so Governor Brownback also had a blue ribbon task force on water. They ended up not producing a final report on kind of their central question, but we were participants in that task force as well. And the bulk of what came out of the Blue Ribbon Task Force became the architecture of 2302, the new water bill that is now driving a lot of these conversations. So even if a task force appears as though it failed, it's advancing that conversation forward. And so very open to the committee making sure that it has the structure that it feels like it needs, that is nimble enough to get the work done. But it's very important, I think, to continue driving the conversation forward. And I'd stand for questions.
I appreciate those comments because the Blue Ribbon Task Force didn't, in my opinion, accomplish very much. This task force, if we're going to go forward with it, I want it to accomplish something. So I appreciate those comments. Questions of Mr. Swati, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Committee, I will direct your attention. I won't read through all of them, but we have several written proponent testimony from a variety of stakeholders, and I would urge you to read that each one of those pieces of testimony that have been provided. And since we have no further proponents, nor any opponents, and no neutral, We will close the hearing on House Bill 2172. And we do plan to certainly spend some time in discussion on 2172 on another day. But I do want to back up. Committee is entirely up to the committee. House Bill 2254, which was our first bill requiring the milk producers to hold payments in trust, et cetera. Is there objection to working the bill today? I generally do not work a bill the same day that we have a committee hearing, but since I saw this as non-controversial, and I saw it as potentially a consent calendar item, and we're up against the clock on our 3 days. But if there's objection by anyone, we will hold to another day. I see no objection. Committee, what is your desire regarding House Bill 2254? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee recommend this bill favorably and ask that it be put on the consent calendar.
There is a motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Shane. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'm not going to ask you to close because there's no need. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Committee, we still have a couple minutes. I'm just going to throw out 2085, which was the bill that we heard, extending the permit period from 5 years to 10 years. Don't mind holding this over, but I also don't mind working it, or at least starting if we have just a few minutes. Committee, what is your thoughts on House Bill 2085? And if anyone wants to hold anything over, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the body's willing, I would move that we pass out House Bill 2085 favorably for passage and place it on the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion, and we have a second by Senator Shane. Now, Senator Bowser, you had your hand up to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Titus stole my thunder. I was going to place it on consent calendar.
I apologize for him stealing your thunder. I should have recognized you first. You could have stole his thunder. Okay. Okay, we have a motion to pass House Bill 2085 favorably and place it on the consent calendar. You've heard the motion, and we do have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion appears to pass. Motion does pass. Committee, I appreciate your work. We will not have to meet tomorrow. Thanks for your efficiency today, but we will be meeting Monday and Tuesday of next week to try to wrap up our committee responsibilities for the session. I have nothing additional. We are adjourned.